AMD entering the foray of high-end desktop solutions was first rumoured just shortly after Ryzen was released. Industry insiders were whispering that we might see a product up to 16 cores, 32 threads, and perhaps even on an entirely different platform. Shortly after this, we saw the odd benchmark appear, but of course, very scant in detail, and there was always the possibility that it might have been a fake. Shortly after that, we had Financial Analyst Day 2017, and this confirmed everything. We had a 16-core, 32-thread CPU on a brand new platform. There were not exactly a massive amount of details, but it certainly whet the appetite for when AMD would provide yet further information, and that was at Computex 2017, which has just been and gone. During this conference, AMD did confirm there was no panicked last-minute changes for the CPU. It was still going to remain 16 cores, 32 threads, so they weren't, at least on the surface, worried about Intel's X299 platform, and perhaps most telling, they confirmed that all CPUs would have SMT support, and all of the Threadripper CPUs would have 64 PCIe lanes available. My name's Paul, and in this video we're going to be discussing a website by the name of OCaholics leak, because it supposedly is leaking the entire SKU lineup of Threadripper, the desktop CPUs anyway. We have 9, count them, 9 CPUs from AMD, and they range from the 1998X, which supposedly is going to be a 16-core, 32-thread CPU with a turbo speed of 3.9 GHz, although XFR is unknown, with a TDP of 155, all the way down to 1955, that's the CPU name of course, which features 10 cores, 20 threads, and turbos up to 3.7 GHz. Now it is important to know that those names are not new. We have heard them before, so it's possibly yet further confirmation that those names are real, or these rumours / information may be inaccurate. It's up to you if you decide to believe them or not. However, these models, at least on the surface, do make an awful lot of sense. After all, they very much mirror what AMD have done with the Ryzen 3s, the Ryzen 5s, and the Ryzen 7. For example, if we take the Ryzen 7, you've got the 1700, the 1700X, along with the 1800X. So closely duplicating that across various SKUs in the Threadripper lineup does make, at least on the surface, some measure of, I guess, continuity. I think it's fair to say, however, that AMD have a set of CPUs, if this lineup is accurate for almost everyone. Now, naturally, pricing is going to still be up in the air at the moment, and I have a feeling the company probably haven't even nailed that down themselves. After all, the CPUs are not going to emerge on store shelves until summer. And let's just be totally honest, because we do have a price listing from Intel themselves regarding its own i7, i5, and i9 lineup on, of course, the X299 platform. These CPUs, depending upon which one you're getting, for example, the i5-7640X is going to cost you just $242 US, whereas the top of the line 18-core 36-thread model is going to cost you a rather cool $1,999 US. Now, that's not to say that Intel are ripping you off, because really it's going to have to wait until we see benchmarks to see how each platform outperforms each other, or should I say does perform against one another. While Intel's pricing is certainly expensive, for example, the 7960X costs $1,700 US, assuming you don't get the, early adopter tax, which certainly is not exactly uncommon for new CPU releases or GPU releases. I'm sure that AMD can probably release a CPU, for example, the 1998X, or even the regular 1998, which would be cheaper. But there are other questions and other decisions you have to make, and really it comes down to the performance. I do have a feeling that neither of these platforms is going to be the absolute best. I feel Intel may have advantages in certain applications which require higher clock speeds, but we'll have to wait and see. After all, with the 7980XE, it has 18 cores, 36 threads, and to be honest with you, I do feel that it wasn't intending and that means Intel wasn't intending to have a CPU with this sheer number of cores available. I do feel that it was somewhat taken aback by AMD and their aggressiveness with Threadripper. And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if anything over 14 cores was just unplanned by Intel. Therefore, the final clock speeds, the yields, and plumb the reliability of these chips, I'm going to not be skeptical and negative, but I do want to see quite, the processors basically going into the wild, not cherry-picked review samples. And it's very easy, of course, for a company to send a engineering sample that they know is absolutely brilliant. It's going to clock all the way up to the wazoo, and doesn't necessarily match that or retail silicon. But assuming Intel do have a clock speed advantage, I do feel that in some applications they will certainly have a performance advantage over Ryzen. But that, along with AVX 512, which is definitely a nice bonus, won't necessarily mean that it's the best platform for many people. And of course, pricing does come into this. This video isn't really the place to have an Intel versus AMD debate, and it does heavily depend likely on the application that you're running. And I don't believe that AMD would like themselves to be thought of as the budget solution, because there are certainly going to be advantages with Ryzen in certain situations. Possibly with multi-GPU configurations, possibly if you're doing a lot of 3D work, that type of thing. Unfortunately, really it's going to come down, at least to many people in the real world, to pricing. And few folks can afford $2,000 or even $1,700 or possibly even $1,400 for a CPU. I mean, I read a lot of your comments, I read a lot of the emails you send me, Facebook messages you send me. Admittedly, they've been pretty crap with that recently because we all know what's going on in all my personal situations. So I've not been as good responding, but that's going to change over the next couple of weeks. And I do know that a lot of folks just don't have that cash, and you're kind of wondering, hey, would it be good for me to go with like a 12-core Ryzen? And it's certainly a advantageous thing if you're doing a lot of 3D work. And yes, I do get a lot of folks messaging me asking my opinions on like Photoshop builds or video editing builds, or perhaps you're doing maybe a little bit of game design but still need that level of performance. So perhaps if AMD can be very aggressive with pricing, it can still be very competitive to Intel. As full disclosure, we've actually been contacted by a company asking if we'd be interested to take a look at their X299 motherboard. I don't know which one yet, to be honest. Along with, of course, an Intel CPU. We don't know which one. Presumably it will be one of the Skylake-x CPUs, and I'm very much looking forward to testing it out because I do feel it's a very nice platform Intel have constructed here. But, once again, to go back over old rope, if you will, I realise that this kind of pricing is not for everyone. $2,000 or whatever CPU you decide to opt for in Intel's lineup is just really expensive. And I do realise that Intel have decided to put out the 7640X and the 7740X as a means for people to jump in, I guess, to the low end. The problem is with those CPUs, they're just pointless. Because first of all, they only have 2-channel DDR4 memory, which AMD are offering quad-channel DDR4 across all of its lineup. The fact that it's only got 16 PCIe lane support, it's just, I don't understand their point. I just don't understand the purpose of those CPUs, especially the 7640X. The 7800X seems quite nice, and for $389 it's not too shabby, but once again, it does really bother me that it, along with the 7820X, only have 28 PCIe lanes available, and it just seems a little crappy, to be honest. And I do feel that if someone's on that type of budget, really wants Intel for whatever reason, then perhaps you'd be better off waiting for Coffee Lake later on this year. But that's just my opinion, of course, your mileage may vary. Anyway, all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon, take care, bye for now.